Tavis Smiley, who hosted his own nightly interview show on PBS since 2004, fighting back tonight against what PBS calls troubling allegations about his conduct, but the network is standing by its decision to suspend his show. Joining me now is Tavis Smiley. Thank you so much.
Don, good to see you, man.
How are you
all right?
doing?
I'm well. And yourself?
Are you getting any rest? Because these are troubling allegations.
Not much rest at all, but I can tell you that we've had a bit of breaking news in this case. When I first came out a week ago and commented about this, I said very clearly that I had never groped, coerced, or inappropriately exposed myself to anyone. I said then that PBS had rushed to judgment here, that they had engaged a sloppy investigation. Essentially, they had not connected the dots and done their job. We just received a letter a couple hours ago from PBS after my appearance on Good Morning America today. And now, after 3 weeks of imploring them to talk to my staff, to my COO, to my HR people, to debunk whatever it is they've heard, which they refuse to do, they have now sent a letter this afternoon asking if they can meet with those very same people. This is after you've dragged my name through the mud, after you've trampled on my reputation, after you have impacted my earnings, after my sponsors have walked away from me. Now you want to come back and continue the investigation as a result of what happened today.
Do you think, and they released a statement after your interview this morning on the morning program, but do you think this changes the allegations against you? Because the
allegations have always been anonymous to me.
Okay.
What I have said consistently, again, is I have never groped, coerced, or exposed myself to anyone. I have never instructed anyone in my company to take any employment decision based upon my relationship status. And the bottom line is they did a sloppy investigation, and now they want to come back and continue what they should have done before they made this rush to judgment decision.
All right, these are the accusations, and then I want to read what they said. This is according to Variety. According to sources, MSK, which is a firm they hired, took reports from 10 witnesses, a mix of men and women of different races and employment levels in Smiley's organization, most of them former staffers. The investigation found credible allegations that Smiley had engaged in sexual relationships with multiple subordinates, sources said. Some witnesses interviewed expressed concern that their employment status was linked to the status of a sexual relationship with Smiley. 10 witnesses, credible allegations, multiple subordinates. That seems pretty significant.
That statement has a lot in it. First of all, men and women. We don't know, because I don't know what the accusations are. I don't know what the allegations are, who the accusers were. I don't know what that number of men and women is. What if it's 8 men and 2 women? Not to suggest that 2 women's stories don't matter, but after 30 years of being in business, I've hired a lot of folk and we've fired a lot of folk. And there are some folk who have some axes to grind. And I don't think this moment is a moment that should be used, this important moment in this country, talking about how to create a healthy workplace. This should not be used, Don, to exploit wanting to grind. Should not be used in an exploitative way to grind an axe or to seek revenge on someone. And so, again, I sat for 3 hours in these conversations. I was never told what the allegations were, who the accusers were, never allowed to provide any evidence, was not given due process. What happened to the presumption of innocence in this country? So again, you're reading a statement that they told a Variety, and they didn't tell me this stuff. I learned more from that Variety article than I learned in 3 hours of a face-to-face conversation.
So what does it change for you now that they are going to, you said that they're going to...
They've asked to talk to the persons on my staff who run the company, who make all of the employment decisions. We said that 3 weeks ago, and they refused to do it. They made this rush to judgment, trampled on me. Now they want to come back and continue the investigation.
Do you think that would change, though, again, the allegations against you? Do you think that would change?
I repeat again, when you don't know what the allegations against you are, it's hard to answer that question. What I do know is that it shows again, I think we're missing the key point here. It shows again
that they rushed to judgment.
Exactly, and did a sloppy investigation. Yeah. So how do you come back today? Yeah. How do you come back today after all this national outpouring, this national outrage about the way this investigation was conducted, that you denied me due process? How do you come back now?
So you're saying they should have done that before releasing all this information?
Yeah, sure.
So this is what, after your interview this morning, they said, Tavis Smiley needs to get his story straight. First, today on Good Morning America, Mr. Smiley acknowledged he had had multiple sexual encounters with his employees, then struggled to recall the number of current employees with whom he had had sex. This contradicts his Facebook post from last week, where he cited only one previous relationship with an employee. I'm going to stop there, and then we'll put it back up. You want to? Yeah. What do you say to that?
I don't know what interview they were watching. Number one, I didn't disconnect anything. What I said in my statement was that if having a consensual relationship with a colleague, I didn't say one colleague, I said a colleague. I'm talking about a colleague, a coworker. So I never said one, number one. So I didn't change my story this morning on Good Morning America. I told the truth this morning, and I told the truth in my statement, number one. What else do you have that you want?
How many colleagues have you had consensual relationships?
That very question conflates consensual relationships with sexual assault, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct, that's not the right question, quite frankly.
Why not? Why do you say?
I just told you why. Because that very question conflates a consensual relationship with sexual harassment or sexual assault, and those two things don't.
I understand that, but we can talk about that. But that doesn't mean that if I've had a consensual relationship with someone in the workplace, wouldn't I know how many
it's not,
had? And I can explain to you this was consensual and this wasn't.
Exactly. And I know what was consensual. First of all, there was nothing that was not consensual. I've only had in my entire life. I've only had consensual relationships. And most of them, over 30 years of working in this industry, most of them clearly were not in the workplace. So we're talking about a handful of conversations.
Mr. Smiley even told viewers, I don't know where your heart is going to lead you. PBS is certain that it should not lead to multiple sexual relationships between the owner of a company and subordinates over many years, particularly where employment decisions may be linked to sex. So if a woman is, even though you say it's consensual, but a woman may feel obliged to go along with it because she's concerned about her employment. That's how most people would read that.
Here again, this is PBS's rhetoric. So today, we go back to the beginning of this conversation. Today, they finally agreed to talk to the persons who could have addressed those issues had they raised these questions with those persons 3 weeks ago. My point is, how do you put those kinds of statements out, without ever having talked to the folk who were responsible for making these decisions? And here's the last question for me, is that why are you making these statements to the press? Why are you talking to the press and not my attorneys? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they know how to contact my attorneys, but they keep making these comments in the press rather than talking to my attorneys.
You understand the power dynamic that's
Absolutely.
going on. If you are the president of the company,
Absolutely.
Tavis, and you're having a relationship with someone, should you have known
Sure.
better?
What I said this morning, I stand by, which is that there are people who have an opinion that there is no such thing, Don, as a consensual relationship in the workplace. I respect that decision, and I hear that. In my company, we have a policy that does not encourage office relationships, but it doesn't forbid them. Because again, I don't want to tell people who they should hang out with, who they should fall in love with. And there's so many relationships in this country that were started in the workplace. Henry Kissinger met his wife in the workplace. Bill Gates met his wife in the workplace. We all know Barack Obama met Michelle Obama in the workplace. So my point is that relationships can start in the workplace. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But let's not act like we don't live in a society where people work and meet each other all the time, and sometimes things jump off.
So your point is, you think, obviously, we've been having this back and forth, you think that everything is being conflated. A consensual relationship and someone who is abusive in the relationship, from Harvey Weinstein to the person who met his wife, you think they're all being lumped in one category? That's
what they've attempted to do with me. I am not Harvey Weinstein. And I don't know all the particulars of his case. I don't want to prejudge him. What I'm suggesting to you is that I, again, have never groped, coerced, exposed myself to anyone. The sin that I've committed, the great sin, is to have over 30 years a handful of consensual relationships. And if that's the crime, if we're going to start criminalizing people for having legitimate relationships as consenting adults, if that's the crime, then let's just say that. But don't drag me through the mud, damage my reputation, and then come back and say, okay, we're going to continue the investigation.
Would you do, considering all the high-profile people, all the big personalities, the people who have lost their platforms, their jobs, their livelihoods, would you do anything differently now?
Oh, as you know, I've been on this program before. I've written a couple of books, 2 specifically come to mind, talking about the mistakes I've made and the lessons I've learned. There are a number of things I did, 25, 30 years ago that I wouldn't do now. But even again, if one or two of those consensual relationships was a case of misjudgment, I ask you, does that misjudgment rise to the level of public shaming, personal destruction, and wrongful termination? For me, it does not. Not for me or anybody else.
What about the women who feel, according to this investigation, that they were hurt by you? What do you say to them? Do you apologize to them?
I don't know. Again, I am more than happy to apologize to anyone I've offended. But I repeat again, I was never told who the accusers were. I don't know what the allegations were. And in a consensual relationship, as you know, you can prove what a consensual relationship is. You've got letters, cards, gifts, text messages.
Texting is one way you have a relationship.
Photographs, but who doesn't? That's the world we live in nowadays. But again, I was never asked, never given an opportunity to prove that something was consensual because it was never raised in that meeting.
Everybody's lost it. A lot of people lost their jobs.
Yeah.
Some people didn't get to go to the Senate because of all this stuff. How is Tavis Smiley different? Tavis Smiley is innocent of all this?
Tavis Smiley has only had consensual relationships. And speaking of people who've lost jobs, that's how I feel. I've got a staff full of people because of PBS's rush to judgment who are now in the unemployment line during the holiday season. And that does not make me happy.
Do you plan to take legal action against them?
My attorneys are looking into that right now. I don't want to get ahead of them. I will tell you this, that if this in fact does end up in court, because now that they've come back and asked to continue the investigation, it's a little late on a certain level. If this does end up in court, the real tragedy is that millions of taxpayer dollars are going to be spent for PBS to defend itself against this bad decision, and that's not how I think the American people want their tax dollars spent.
Tavis, thank you.
Thank you, Don.